I'm ready, Alex, if you are, and it looks like we've got a great number of people here in the room already, so we can get started. And if people are late, that's no dramas whatsoever.
Yep.
So starting off, before we dive in, really excited everyone, and really excited to share that top point there. NetNada is releasing our AASB S2 research report really soon. So it's full of really practical insights and learnings from this series, but also from over 50 interviews that have been done, over 1,100 specific data points that have been collected from companies. And in exciting news, which we'll also share, we're also going to be hosting a launch event at our offices next week, which you're all more than invited to. And I'm sure you've probably seen the comms already on that. But yeah, we'd love to have you there. And for those of you who are going to be in Sydney, it'd be nice to meet in person if we haven't already. And share some breakfast. And for those of you who are not based in Sydney, please feel free to pass it on to your colleagues. But equally, we're always happy to pass on the recordings as well. Secondly, in that as well, we'll look at the risk management and understanding risk management pillars today. This is why we're all here. And so we'll be focused on understanding the core elements around risk management for climate context. What does that mean? Well, how to identify, how to assess, how to prioritize, and also how to monitor climate-related risks. So this will be a really exciting session. I think this is going to be maybe the juiciest session, if you will, out of the five. And hopefully as a takeaway after that, you'll really understand how to integrate these considerations into your enterprise risk framework, including climate in all of that. We'll also be answering some risk management questions. And so we'll walk through common questions around risk management, and in particular, risk management pillars that are associated to climate. And then lastly, we'll have a live Q&A discussion. So as I mentioned before, if you've got any questions at all, please feel free to put them into the chat. We really want to make sure that we're engaging with you the whole time. And additionally, as I mentioned, if you're just joining now, we'll also have a few quizzes rolling throughout the session so that we can get a bit of a temperature check on how everyone's understanding the content. So jumping to the next slide. Thanks, Alex. For that compliance countdown that I mentioned, if you scan this QR code, conscious of the fact that many of you may be multitasking here, you might be cooking lunch or something if you're working from home while we're going through this. But if you've got your phone handy, you can scan that there. It'll take you to all of the recordings and all of the resources. And it'll also allow you to sign up well in advance for our metrics and targets session on May 29th. So make sure to flag that. And as mentioned before, and as you can see there in the bottom left corner, that's my email address as well as Alex's email address. So if you have any questions during or after the event, or after the webinar, sorry, please feel free just to shoot them over. Upcoming events. So as I mentioned, we've got a really exciting in-person event at our offices here where I am at the greenhouse on May 21st. So next week, it's an 8:30 a.m. kickoff. You can see the link just there that has been put into the chat for an RSVP. All welcome, and it'll be really exciting for Fons and the team and some of our special guests to go through the findings of that AASB S2 report. And secondly, as I briefly mentioned just before, the final session 5, metrics and targets, in a couple of weeks from now. So very quickly, bit of housekeeping. We want you guys to be using the chat box. Make sure when you're responding to send it to everyone, because chances are, if you've got a question, if you've got a concern, somebody else in the group probably does as well. Okay, that's the first thing. Secondly, the Q&A, the quizzes, we really want as much engagement as possible. We don't want this to just be yet, another webinar for you. We want you leaving this session feeling like you've learned something. And to start off, it'd be great if you can put into the chat just what industry you're in, because for me, that helps a lot, who I'm talking to, understanding what your types of businesses are. And then when we go into some of the worked examples, it'd be fantastic to be able to speak specifically to your industry. So that's our first thing, just to check that the chat box is working, just to check that we know that you can do Q&A. It's awesome to see people putting in their industries, and some people even their companies. And I see we've already got a hand up from Ben, so we might go straight to Ben with if that's a question or an issue.
No, it doesn't look like. I think we'll just keep moving along. Plenty of responses coming through here, Lockie. I think we're ready to get stuck into it.
Fantastic. No worries at all, Ben. Thank you very much, and good to see you're from the comm space. So, first things first, we're going to give a really quick recap on mandatory reporting. So, I know many of you already know this, but I think it's worth just having a refresher for those who may not have been in the previous sessions. Australia's mandatory climate reporting, which has started this year, requires large companies to disclose how climate change impacts their business. Now, this is aligned with international standards like the ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, and these rules cover governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics. It's easy to get our heads stuck in just the metrics side of things, but it's much bigger than that. And so those other three key areas are super, super important. And so jumping into I guess what this is all about, and Alex has jumped to that slide. As you can see, we're thinking, for whom, for how long, and why. Before we go past this slide, it's important to remember that AASB S2 is designed for primary users, and those primary users of general purpose financial reporting. So this is really for the investors and the creditors so that they can know how to make decisions and how climate risks affect business outcomes across the short, medium, and long term that you can see there in point two. That's the crux of
And
all of this.
100% looking at, I thought it'd just be good to reinforce as well what we've said in all of the previous sessions, and it's that we really need to think about these climate disclosures and this whole mandatory reporting space in the same way that we think about our current financial disclosures, because it's meant to sit along that side and give information to those primary users.
Spot on. Totally agree. And thanks for that point, Alex. So jumping to the next slide, just very quickly, AASB S1, AASB S2, what are they? We hear a lot of acronyms. Basically, reminder that AASB S1 is voluntary, but AASB S2 is mandatory for many Australian companies, okay, from our current financial year. So this is really where the rubber meets the road, and we're talking specifically about AASB 2, S2, sorry, here. Now, from an assurance perspective, and this may be something that you've seen a lot of, but you find difficult to follow. Our assurance in year one requires companies to report on their related information without assurance. So it really starts, as you can see, from year two, they have to obtain limited assurance. And this is that sort of that lighter touch process where an independent expert, so an auditor, will review the methods and key inputs behind the disclosures. But we're sort of thinking about this as, just a light touch. When you're going into the reasonable assurance, this is where we're looking at as less of like a confidence scan type approach and more like a big compliance approach. Okay, so as we can see, and we'll do some work on the assurance pathways in a little bit, but as we can see, it's really shifting from a lighter, higher level overview into a much more detailed and robust framework moving forward in further years as they expect companies to have this process very much down pat. So the prep for the insurance readiness, sorry, with it becoming mandatory for climate disclosures, limited assurance in year two, and reasonable assurance in year three, companies really do need to start preparing now. Okay, so assurance readiness means building systems, controls, and documentation that allows auditors to verify your climate-related disclosures with confidence. And this includes basically just maintaining really clear data trails. So a reason that NetNata focuses on this is we like to make sure that we keep everything together. So there's clear audit logs, there's clear dates and timestamps when anything's been inputted or removed. What we're really looking for is so that you have very, very good records of how all of your decisions have been made, how all of your policies have been created, and how all information has been provided.
And Lockie, would you recommend for companies to be identifying and speaking with their auditors now, well before these reports are due?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Alex. And what we're seeing a lot with our Group 1 clients is that it's really important to engage the auditor as early as you can, and to understand what the auditor will be looking through. It's important to remember as well that this is new for everyone, including your auditor. So that's an even added, it's an even more important added reason why getting your auditor engaged with also your consultant or your whomever it is that's supporting you, and getting everyone on the same page before things kick off is super beneficial.
Great. We
Okay,
have the
awesome.
first
So
quiz.
before we keep moving, does anyone have any questions on the information so far or the recap so far? And I've just launched our assurance poll question as well. If you guys can fill that out while we respond to some of the questions, and we'll see how we're looking as far as the percentage of the audience here who's
Yeah.
on the right page.
While we're waiting for people to fill out that question, Lockie, we had another question in the chat as to does NetNada provide training programs for auditing?
That's a really good question. No, we don't. We provide lots of training programs, and maybe that's something that we should add to the list. But we currently, as it stands, we do not provide training programs on auditing. But it's a fantastic question.
One thing in terms of that auditing piece, and it is really the million-dollar question, what's going to pass the audit, what's going to be acceptable for limited and then reasonable assurance. We delve really deep into that, into our license to operate research paper that Afonso and a lot of the team have put a lot of effort into. That's what we'll be going into in more depth on the Wednesday breakfast morning session on the 21st of May. So sign up for that. Sign up for that even if you can't make it along, because we will be sending out comms so you can register for the report. Please just sign up for the event if you are going to come along for catering reasons.
Fantastic. If there's no other questions, then we will freeze the poll just there. And the question was, what level of assurance is required for climate disclosures in year 3 of Australia's reporting regime? We had a few answers come in for limited assurance, but we had most answers come in for reasonable assurance. And it is correct. Reasonable assurance, C is the correct answer. So well done for everyone who responded with C. And anyone who was unsure, please feel free again to put a question in the chat, and Alex and I would be more than happy to go into more detail on that. Or maybe a good idea to go back and check some of the other webinars where we covered assurance in a little bit more detail. I'll end that poll and we'll keep moving though in the interest of time. Good stuff. Great engagement as well. Thank you. Alrighty. So now it's time to jump into it. For the risk management pillars overview, the standard asks, what a risk, who's impacted, and really how are they going to be managed? This is what we hear all the time. Okay. So we have this what, who, how. This is why we put this here. What we want you guys to be thinking about is how are we embedding climate risk into your enterprise risk management structure? That's the main thing here. It should be linked in just like every other risk consideration is. The best thing I've heard is start thinking of it like cyber. Okay. And that's the way to start to train your brain, to start to put this to the front of those meeting agendas, start to put this to the front of that risk and consideration concerns. Okay. So as mentioned at the start of the session, remember that we need to identify, assess, prioritize and monitor, and then also integrate. They're the big key things here. So what does that mean? We're identifying our climate related risks, both our physical and transition related risks. We'll come to that and we'll dive a little bit deeper into what is a physical risk and what are transition risks. We're also then assessing the likelihood and the magnitude. Okay. So how often are they occurring and also what's the severity of them? And then we're prioritizing and monitoring these risks over time. short term, medium term, long term. We're looking at them very much holistically. And lastly, we're integrating this whole process into the organization's existing risk management framework, making sure that this is all a part of everything else we consider. Just like I said before, from a cyber perspective, from a financial perspective, climate is now bundled in with all of that. We can jump forward. Thanks, Alex. So strong climate risk management, it really just requires us to be thinking about how do we strengthen our governance, how do we support our strategic decisions, and also how do we build stakeholder trust. I think the biggest misconception in climate-related risk is that we're just talking about what happens if a flood hits, what happens if a fire hits, okay? But it's much bigger than that. It's what happens if the sentiment around climate changes? What happens if our clients come back to us and start to require certain reporting or certification standards? What happens if carbon taxes get introduced? What happens if new government policy gets released? These are also climate related risks that need to be considered. And we know that the big ticket items are those catastrophic scenarios where our brain first jumps to when we think climate risk. But it's really important to think about this as not just those, it's also where we can have those sort of influences on our day-to-day business. So what does that look like? Strong disclosures, we're going into specifics, right? We're speaking about niche areas, sea level rise in Queensland, as you can see here on this slide, right? We're quantifying it. We're actually putting dollar values next to it. We're putting timings to it. We're using clear references and linking straight to the tools. Weak disclosures is probably what most of us may have seen or may think of straight away, is where we start to go quite broad. This slide's really simple. Just think strong is detailed and clear, weak is broad and vague. Okay, so you can see, extreme weather. There's no time horizons. There's sort of no real evidence on how we're monitoring or checking over time. That's what we want to avoid, rather than the obvious benefits of having a strong disclosure.
Yeah, and I think this is where the interconnectivity of all of the pillars really comes into play. It's not enough just to, anyone could go in and ask any ChatGPT, Claude to give you some good risk recommendations for your business, but it's really clear that you can't just have the correct answer. You need to show the working out. And that ties directly to the strategy, the governance pillars. Are you meeting? Are you monitoring? Can you prove that this has been something that's been considered over time and it's not something that's just been thrown together at the end of the reporting period? So really important to take those, and Lochie's kind of outlined them nicely in the bottom there, but you need to be able to show at all stages across all pillars the working out, the consultation.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's diving now more into these weak disclosures. We'll look at some of the common pitfalls. Sorry. So, things like generic risk lists. We spoke about that just before, but extreme weather events, but no actual specifics about where or what or how. Siloed risk ownership as well. Okay, so super common, and I think this is something that I'm really excited to see changing in so many businesses. A sustainability manager or a sustainability team who really isn't connected to the rest of the business and isn't brought into those sort of key decision making discussions, especially connected with the finance team. Super important. That the next one there sort of links nicely from that, but also lack of processes and descriptions, and as we mentioned previously, that static approach. There's no real measurement. We're not looking at it in a dynamic nature. We're not looking at it as the business changes. There may be new offices or locations brought on, and these considerations aren't evolving with the change of the business. This is a 101 on what not to do. And if you're not doing these things, then you can be more confident that you should be in that strong bucket rather than that weak bucket. Awesome. So next question. See how we're going here. So our next question is going to be, on, just loading it here. Sorry. There we go. All right. Which of the following best describes the purpose of risk management pillars under the AASB S2?
Right, and perfectly timed question here on the chat as well, Lockie, while we wait for everyone to give us their answers. Does the standard require you to disclose the risk analysis, e.g., the likelihood and consequence ratings and details for each identified CRO, or is it just there as a process? So to summarize, are we expected to identify the likelihood or just to identify it and show that it is a process?
There's another question there as well. Um, sorry, Alex, do you want to respond to that question? That was just
Yeah,
very
no
long.
problem.
It's too a bit hard for me
Yeah,
to.
so again, in terms of the overall objective is that we are passed by the auditor and the limited assurance is given the green tick. And we essentially, for a Group 1 company, we get through this first time of the unknown, if you will. The expectation is not that you are going to be able to very accurately and carefully calculate the likelihood of a risk happening. Obviously, you need to be identifying and reporting on likely risks or risks that are relevant to your business. Likely is probably a bit of a loaded word. The the emphasis is more on the process and show that you have gone through and done the work and engaged the right stakeholders and not just, picked it out of the hat essentially. That's where the focus is to begin with. It may change into the future as we have more data and better insights, but I wouldn't be too hung up on calculating the likelihood of something affecting you as a business.
Yeah, great answer. Speaking of great answers, 25 from 25. I'm going to end the poll there. Maybe it is Alex and my good explanation, or maybe it's the fact that C is always right in multiple choice. But correct. It is to disclose how climate-related risks are identified, assessed, managed, and integrated into overall risk framework. So well done, everyone. Fantastic. Um, we'll keep moving forward. Keep the
Yeah.
questions coming. Keep the
We'll come
engagement
back. Well, you've
going.
got two questions there, but let's just
Yep.
keep going, Lockie, and we'll come back to them at the next stage to not get too slowed down here.
Okay, no worries at all. Well, we're jumping now into looking at the types of climate-related risks and also how to assess them. So, this is, yeah, where we'll start to sort of get a bit of meat on the bones, I'd say, of the whole piece. So, first things first, physical risk, transition risk, super, super important. Climate risks are defined as those that can be material affecting your business. That's the main thing to think about. So climate risks fall into two main categories. We're looking at physical risks, which include acute and chronic events, as you can see here. So some of these acute events might be like a sudden flood or bushfire, right? This happens, a bit of a once off. Of course, we know that due to climate change, it's happening more often, more frequently, and more severely. But these are more of a once off. Chronic is where we're seeing those sort of elongated, continuous impacts from a physical perspective, rising temperatures, sea level rise, long droughts, that sort of stuff. Okay. Now, it's very, very clear to us, obviously, why these risks can affect different industries. And we're going to dive into some specific examples later on. But agriculture, we're looking at crop failure, manufacturing, facility damage, energy and infrastructure, heat waves issues. So yeah, quite clear. Transition risks is what I spoke to a little bit before. Okay. So transition risks come from the global shift towards a low carbon economy, new policies, carbon pricing, disruptive technologies, and even just the changing expectations of consumers and investors. So both of these things, as you can understand, can hugely materially, sorry, it's a hard word to say, impact your business, but in very different ways. Okay. So that's the big thing you need to be thinking about when we're looking at our climate related risks. Yes, the physical ones are the easy ones to think about straight away, but the transition ones are equally as important. Okay. And again, going back to what we said at the start, we're thinking about how does this impact investors' decision making. One of the main reasons, for the reporting's purposes. And so these need to be well considered, well documented, and well explained and reported on. Now, in this slide here, we can see those physical risks, and I'll let you read them rather than me reading them out to you. But I also want to point out the opportunities. When we have risks, right, we also have opportunities, hopefully, most of the time. And so you can see in the physical and transition opportunities there, we've got things like resilience, energy sourcing, access to new markets, resource efficiency, increasing reputation, enhanced employee satisfaction, right? So there are opportunities here as well. It's not just all risk, and it's important from a business perspective that you identify these opportunities as well. And again, as part of this process, document and create that logic behind why you see these opportunities for the business as well as the risks. So, how are we going to assess all of this? Well, look, assessing climate risks involves more than just identifying the threats. Okay, we want to take a structured approach to evaluating all of the potential impacts on your business and the organization. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to start by considering the nature of said risk. Okay, so of course we want to know, is it a physical risk like floods, heat waves, whatever it may be that affect either your operations or even your supply chain? Okay, or is it a transitional risk like we spoke about just before, new regulations, new technology, shifting customer expectations, whatever it may be, okay? Once we've done that and we know the nature of what we're looking at, then we start to look at the likelihood, okay? So it's, again, following a very similar process. How probable is this, right? Is it going to happen regularly? Is it going to happen severely? Are there some historical trends that we can look at? Are there market signals? Do we even have any forecasts potentially? Once we've done this, once we've got the nature and the likelihood, then we can start to assess the magnitude as well. Okay. And so this, of course, is looking at not just how is it going to impact that environment, that supply chain, that operations, those customers or key stakeholders, but also how is this going to affect your revenue, your operating costs, any of your asset values, your market positioning, anything that's valuable to your business and important. Okay, so taking away from this, what I want us thinking about is what's the nature of the risk, what's the likelihood of the risk, and what's going to be the magnitude of the impact of that risk or those risks, plural.
Yeah, and I think this slide really answers some of the questions we had earlier. So it's a good one to take into consideration here. And obviously, as we go forward, and after this first year of seeing these disclosures, all of these answers and what's expected around here, and things like such as the likelihood is going to be a lot more obvious. But obviously, for those Group 1 companies and the unknown, it can be a bit daunting at the moment. But that's why we're here to help.
Yeah, and I think just one thing going back, sorry there, Alex, and thanks for that point because it helped me realize that I sort of skipped over the importance of us using both the qualitative and quantitative inputs there. And, of course, there are things that we can look at, like, say, projected losses or the emissions data that you'll have from doing your analysis. And then there's also, of course, going to be things that are, a little bit more qualitative, like legal exposure, for example. Okay. And so it's really, really important to be looking at both. And then as we do with the metrics and targets, as we do with, looking at, say, your emissions, for example, it's also really important to look at the materiality of each of those risks so that you can prioritize those key ones. Awesome. So this, as you can see here, is taken from Ventia's sustainability report. And, we want to share with you great examples of companies doing this, and we're going to share a few more examples throughout this webinar. But as you can see, Ventia, has provided 4 climate scenarios. Okay. Now, I want you to think about your scenario analysis sort of like your compass, right? It's helping you think about, which direction to head in. It helps you to test your resilience against any of these potential possible future scenarios. I did see a question briefly pop up in the chat just before about something to do with 4 degrees. Well, in this scenario, we're looking at everything of futures from 1.5 degrees all the way to 4 degrees. Okay. So it's not necessarily about a prediction. It's more so about preparation. And that's how we're going to use our climate scenario analysis to sort of steer us in the right way. Remembering that also as we go into this bit.
Before we go into that bit, Lockie, actually, just because it'd be good to touch on a bit more about the climate scenarios. We've got a few questions coming in here.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of obviously Ventiers has done 4 climate scenarios here. How many are we expected to disclose? And is there difficulty as well? One of the questions around a 4 degree scenario when there is, not much publication available. Um, and it's usually around that kind of 1.5 to 2 degree Paris aligned scenarios.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So first things first, you're not necessarily you're not required to disclose up to 4 degrees. Okay, you're just required to disclose scenarios, right? Now, 4 degree targets are very, very hard to come up with. Um, there's often risks there that might not be obvious from today's data. There's often risks there that, yeah, we don't have enough information on. So you're not expected to be disclosing to 4 degrees at all. I want to make that really clear. These examples are gold standard, is how I'd respond to that.
Yeah, great. Cool. We'll keep moving along, and there's some good responses and engagement in the chat as well. With May coming in saying, "My climate specialist advised to avoid 4 degrees as it does not support much life. Nothing will really matter." um, and then we have Nathan Birrell saying, "Use the RCPs as your guide. RCP 8.5." Um, so yeah, it's again, there's plenty of information here. Ventia is a bit of a gold standard example, as we said, and we're trying to bring light to people who are already doing what's required in the mandatory reporting guidelines. So again, you're not expected to do it to this level.
Yeah. And I think to the RCP's point there, and thanks, Dathan, for making that, it's really, really important to help to use those to help underpin your scenarios. Because really at the end of the day, we want to be providing something to our stakeholders that's credible and that has credible inputs. Okay. So that is definitely the sort of guiding baseline that we can use. So yeah, thanks for that point there, Dathan.
Great. Back to the steps we have here, Lockie, around starting with scoping the assessment.
Yeah, and look, it's quite clear this slide, and obviously you can read through it and it probably speaks better than I can try to speak through it. But at the end of the day, our risk matrices they're essential for us when we're comparing climate risks to other business risks. So you should be plotting out all of these risks and based on their likelihood and their impact, as you can see here, and stepping them out, prioritizing them, and then setting up, the right plans and actions that suit the business. It really all comes down to transparent communication, though. I think that's a big thing that we talk about all the time. And so on that, before we go to the quizzes and the questions, making sure that you're setting up this process so that it has the right feedback loops and it does actually incorporate all of the considerations from your disclosures, but also your holistic piece here. So, don't think that this is a linear process is the one thing I would add to this slide. You should be sort of continuously looping back on each of these points to make sure that that feedback is still being taken on board and built upon. All right, awesome. So I know there's lots of questions and we will take a lot of those questions now. I'm going to also put one more quiz in here, which will be related to our climate-related risks. So I'll open that up now. Oh, it's telling me that I've already got a poll shared in this meeting, so I might need to.
While you're getting that up as well, Another great question from Peter Dunn as to what evidence we need to show to demonstrate the undue costs and effort with respect to providing qualitative versus quantitative information. And I do think as well, it goes to what information is publicly available, and obviously it's relevant to the size and the existing research and the existing experience that you report. If you're a consultant working for a Group One company, so obviously needs to be taken into account, but you're not expected to be doing original, peer-reviewed research into climate risks that may not exist. So at the moment, that is at the at the decision of the auditor, but it is again just a reasonable bit of a common sense on due cost and effort. We don't have the exact figure or timeline on that at the moment.
Yeah. Fantastic. Alex, I know you're monitoring the chat and all the questions. Are there any questions that we've missed while we were going through just before?
Uh, we had one. Could you share some of the risk questions to ask yourself to avoid the generic risk list? I like the what if carbon pricing comes in.
Yeah, for sure. Again, we'll share these slides afterwards, so we can share those with you in that. But yeah, it really depends, like across physical and transition related risks. Like it's a long list. So I'd probably run out of breath if I sat here repeating them all. But we'll share the slides and a lot of the types of risk are in these slides.
Yep.
Okay, well, on the poll side of things, looks like everyone understands assessing climate related risk, which is great. I thought I'd maybe steered people off with the C is always right, but no, we're correct here. What are the three key risk factors to consider when assessing a climate related risk? And 24 from 24, 100% correct. The nature of the risk, its likelihood, and its potential magnitude. So well done, everyone there, and I'll end that poll and share the results. Oh no, that was my user error from last time. Okay, we're learning.
Okay, that the results just came up, but we better get through to the next few slides, Lockie, as we've got a bit to cover to finish
Yeah,
it off.
we'll keep moving. We've got about 12 slides to go, so I think we'll get there, but we'll move a bit faster. So look, great stuff, everyone, so far. Now it's time we start to look at how we prioritize our risks and integrate all of that into our climate considerations. So first things first, we're looking at financial impact, likelihood, reputational effects, and also the regulatory pressures. Okay. And so that's when we're, the key factors that we're looking to consider here. It's really important that we start by embedding climate risk into our broader risk framework. And then we use this to prioritize all of the right stuff across our risk matrix. Okay. We want to identify the risks that are most likely to affect us in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term across our performance. Okay. So really what we're looking to do is we're looking at these key factors and then we're looking at those short, medium term and long term impacts. Okay. Conscious that we're a bit short on time, Alex, we'll keep moving on that one. Now, using a risk matrix, these are again some examples from Ventia, but also from EY as well. Risk matrices are really essential for how we're comparing our climate risk to other business risks. I mentioned cyber before. We've mentioned financial risks before as well, right? We want to be plotting out all of our risks based on the likelihood and the impact and flagging the ones that are going to exceed our board's risk appetite. So only risks that are both material and time relevant should be making it onto our risk register, but we of course can matrix out all of the risks. So we'll use our matrix to then set our register as a way to think about it. And of course, just like in the rest of our business, our materiality is going to be judged by financial and strategic impacts, as well as the sensitivity on these sort of short, medium, and long-term timelines.
Yeah, and as we've done here, we've pulled out some of the EYs, the Ventias, like this is all publicly available information in their sustainability reports, and all you need to think of is these companies that are large enough to be taking on a lot of investment capital. They've been doing it for a long time. Just go onto one of their websites, and you can do a lot of research on yourself and look at some great data matrices. And we'll send these slides over, but it's quite easy to find and get a hold of these.
Yeah, great point. This slide very simply directly aligns with paragraph 25 from the AASB S2, which just sets out the minimum disclosure requirements for risk management. So we look at integration to our RMF, we look at processes for our risks, processes for our opportunities, and also changes in the process. And these disclosures, they're not optional, they're foundational. And so you need to start thinking about how building these in to your considerations as part of building into your climate report, essentially. Okay, so yeah, this is essentially taken just directly from the AASB, but we'll break them down a little bit more. So risk identification, we're clearly explaining how your organization identifies climate-related risks. Okay, so are we using scenario analysis? Are we doing supply chain mapping? Are we doing regular scanning of government legislation or possible regulatory changes? Are we doing site-specific analysis? Okay, you might have 10 properties around Australia or 100 properties around the world. Are we, going back to that example before, are we using weak and vague terms like, sea level rise, or are we using strong and precise information like a change to a climate in Queensland? Okay, and so that's our risk identification. Sorry, our risk assessment then goes just beyond just listing out the risks. Okay, we're looking at how each risk is evaluated, and we're thinking again about its nature. Okay, physical or transition related risks, and the likelihood and the magnitude. And I know that you all know that because we scored 100% in that quiz question just before. And then we're looking at prioritizing. Okay, how do we determine which are most material? Looking at our thresholds, looking at the financial impacts, looking at the reputational impacts, and again, looking at the board appetite for this risk as well. Super, super important. And then lastly, the monitoring. It's one of the first things we mentioned in today's session. It's simply not good enough to have a static process. You need to have a dynamic approach to this. You need to be able to continuously monitor and see how things are performing. So they're the main considerations that I want everyone to be across there. And I'm sure we will be when we get to quiz time. Okay, so our inputs and parameters, key things to consider here, just straight from the slide. Data sources, as you can see, the scope of operations, time horizons, the scenario parameters, and the justification of choices. Look, these are things that we've already, as you can tell, we've already touched on in this webinar. And I think it just speaks to the fact that this process is not overly complicated. I think it's actually quite repetitive. But once you get a firm understanding of some of these key repeating themes, then your risk management process can actually become, really straightforward and really easy to stay on top of, which makes having it as something that is dynamic and not static certainly, less daunting, I think, is a good way to put it. Scenario analysis, and how we're applying scenario analysis. We're really just looking to clarify how we identify our risks. Okay, what are the assumptions that we're using, and what are the areas that we've been including? Okay, so this, of course, will reveal different things about how we shape and consider risk in our risk matrix, and ultimately what ends up in our risk register. But we're looking at this of what is the underlying information that we're using to make some of these assumptions, and what are the focus areas that we've been looking at.
Yeah, great. And I think one of the interesting ones as well is the flexibility around the timing of use. So are you using scenario analysis to guide your risks, or are you using it to test. So lots of interesting ways to kind of to think about it and to develop, an actually legitimate, authentic risk framework.
Great point. Um, Nature, likelihood, and magnitude. So each risk really should be assessed by its nature, likelihood, and magnitude, including the reputational and operational consequences. Okay, so um, how is this going to affect, not just from a financial perspective, but how is this going to tie into your strategic planning? Is the best way to look at this. And again, I know we've touched on this before, but it's the fact that a lot of these considerations aren't just impacts, for example, on your physical assets or impacts on your supply chain. They're also on reputation and your ability to do business. I think the next one we're looking at is prioritizing.
Prioritizing,
Is it?
yes.
I think we're having just lagging there.
Yeah, we got it up here on our screen there. How do you prioritize climate related risks?
Oh, awesome. Sorry. So following on from that and on this slide, look, we're using our risk matrix. We already know that, and we've hammered that through in this session. We want to have that clear criteria and understand how we're going to set up our prioritization. We want to be able to compare to other risks, and of course, this will help us frame what we deem as material. And we also want to make sure that we're all clear and aligned on our risk tolerance, and that is so important that that is linked to the board as well. Remembering back to the start of this session, one of our issues that we often see is the sustainability team is a little bit siloed, and they don't have that sort of clear dialogue with the finance team and the broader departments within the business. And this, of course, includes the board. And then lastly, inclusion on the risk register and strategic planning. We'll race through these. Monitoring, we're looking at ongoing reviews. Remember, we're making sure that things aren't static. We're making sure we've got a dynamic way to keep tracking against targets. We want to make sure everything's integrated in with the business. We want to make sure that we've got clear indicators for any warning signs. And we also want to make sure that as the business grows and evolves, we're able to evolve our monitoring practices. So as I mentioned before, if a new office is brought on, of course, we're going to evolve the practice to support that as well. And as we mentioned on that slide, we're always looking for a repeating feedback loop.
Yeah. And these slides are just put a bit more depth than me. And if you want to delve even deeper, we've also referenced the paragraph and sections within the standard that you can go back to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, look, these slides really are sort of summing up what we've already discussed, but just with a little bit more information, as Alex said there. And lastly here, integration into our overall framework. Okay, opportunity identification, scenario analysis, what our assessment criteria is, prioritization, monitoring, and changes over time. So as you can see, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of repeating in the process here. Awesome. And I believe this is the last of these sort of content heavy slides. And looking at, the extent, the decision making, I know there's a lot of content there. It's almost better for people to read than me to
Yeah, we
try
can
and
send this over. So we'll just kind of
read
skip
through.
ahead
Yeah,
to the questions and they can go through what we've already covered there in their own time.
fantastic. Okay, so with that in mind, and we've done a lot of repeating in those last few slides, so I'm assuming that we're going to have high performance in this last poll. The key reporting areas. Let's see how we go here. Which of the following is a required disclosure under key reporting areas under risk management, in brackets, paragraph 25 of AASB S2?
Making these too easy, Lockie. All these people have been coming along to every session.
You think, or I
Oh, we'll
think you've
see.
got
We'll
somebody
see.
who's like very fast on the button, and then everyone else just follows.
Everyone needs a pat on the back anyway.
That's true.
Nearly at the end of the week, nearly at the end of this great compliance series. Only one more. Um, so Also,
And
any
that's it.
questions while we're waiting? And if you need to jump off, all good. We will send this slide pack, Abdullah. Dathan, thanks for jumping along, and hopefully we'll see you at the breakfast session as well.
I'll stop the poll just there because everyone here is too good. Just one thing I wanted to jump to before people leave, and Alex, if you jump across, here if we stop here, this is an example of a weak slide from my behalf. Okay, this is um when we're looking at real world examples, and I put this in to say financial institutions, banks, and investors, and you can see it's quite vague, right? It's quite open ended. Um, Transition risk in lending and investments. These are the type of examples you see all the time, okay? And a very vague language, as you can read there yourself, incorporating climate risk assessment into credit and investment decisions. This is what it's everywhere when you're looking at resources. A strong slide in this scenario would be the next one, which is where we're actually speaking about a specific example, a specific business, what they've actually done and reported on, their scenario analysis, what that revealed, how they made sure this was overseen, what the key strategies were. And if you go to the next slide, Alex, I've done another example. Again, a weak example in retail and consumer goods, vague, generic, broad, and then jumping across, something a lot more specific with Coles and some, very good work that they've done in their supply chain disruptions and reputational risk analysis.
These are great examples, Lockie, and I think it's just so good to have this in the back of your mind when you're testing against the risks that you may have identified. Are they weak? Are they vague? And then you can come back and just have and essentially just apply the tests that we've outlined in here to improve them because you always want to be improving, want to get them specific. So, great examples.
Perfect. Well, that's that, everyone. And look, thank you very much for spending your lunchtime with us. We always appreciate it. Thank you even more for being so active and participating so much with so many great questions and responding to all of our quiz questions. I hope you have a fantastic week. Alex and I are hanging around if you want to hang around and ask us questions, but if not, have a fantastic end to the day and rest of the week. And thanks for coming.